In this tutorial, we'll be looking at using the TySpline Follow Path tool in 3ds Max. First thing, under your Create panel in the geometry, select a sphere and then click and drag to create the sphere. We also want to add a TyFlow icon, so that's down here, and click and drag it to select your TyFlow icon. The other thing we need to do is to add a spline. So if we go to the shapes section and the splines in the drop down menu, select splines and click line, and then we just want to create a random spline. So when you get to the second point, click and drag to create curves. And then press escape to finish the spline. If we go into the modify panel and then click down on this line, on the drop down for line, and select vertex, and then select the select and move option, select a spline and maybe change some of these in the Z axis so that the particles will move up and down as well. Select the TyFlow icon and go into the modifier panel and open the editor. So in here, click and drag a birth event and make all the particles birth at 0. So at the start and the end, we want it to be 0 and start with 100 particles. Click and drag position object beneath birth and then select pick and choose your sphere. So that will birth the particles on the sphere. If you right click on the sphere and select object properties, then untick renderable and say tick display as box and say OK. So this will show you the particles, but you won't be able to see the sphere in a render. Next, we want to give the particles a shape. So find shape and click and drag beneath position object. Scroll down and select 3D under mesh type and select sphere high res. And then click on display and make sure under type that you've got geometry selected. So this will show the particles as spheres now. You go back into shape and down in the parameters you can see the size. If you click the tick next to scale and then make it 200%, it'll make these twice the size. Next we want to find path follow. So that's in the blue section, and click and drag it underneath shape. So select pick with your path follow selected and choose the spline. Now when we drag our animation, they will try and follow the spline as best as they can, but they're going much too fast. We might just move our sphere to the start of the spline. So I've lined it up just using the different directional arrows to the start of the spline. So now you can see if we drag our animation bar, it tries to follow the spline, but the particles are moving far too fast. So next we want to add a slow underneath the path follow. So now the particles will follow the spline a bit better. We might change the velocity to 10%, which is making it even better. But now we'll go back into path follow, change the velocity attraction to 1 meter. We'll see what that has an effect. So now you can see it's following the path even better. Now that the particles are following the line better, we might go back to birth and increase the amount to 250. So now we've got more particles following the spline. The last step is to find spline paths and click and drag that under the slow. Say create new and have it set to trajectories. So now as the particles move around, their trajectories are traced by the spline path. And then what we have to do is add a mesh so that those spheres will show up. So I've just gone back into the editor, and if I go into shape, I might decrease the size of the balls back to 100, just because they're looking a bit large. And then if we run through it again, you see the balls are creating the TySpline. If you select your TySplines and go into modify, you can actually change the basic settings. So we can change the radius, say, to 0.2 of a meter. And this will just give us a finer line for all of them. So to add materials to your splines, go to your material editor, and then to apply a color to the actual splines, you have to drag and drop that onto where the sphere is, and that will give them a color. And then to color the balls, which are these ones, you click and drag it onto TyFlow. So I might add a new one. We'll make it a V-Ray material, and we'll go as a V-Ray light and click OK. So if you click and drag the V-Ray light onto the TyFlow, I'll just move my screen. So if you click and drag it onto the TyFlow, that will apply it to the actual orbs at the end. So next up, we want to find a shot to render. So set up the camera where you want it, go into render setup. I've added a V-Ray sun, so we'll see how that goes, and just center it. And we might drag it back so the balls are in the frame. And we'll go render. You can now see that there's the lights at the edge following our spline paths around. So you can play with your render settings to get the lighting right and things like that. If you select your TySplines and go into modify, you can actually change the basic settings. So we can change the radius, say, to 0.2 of a meter. And this will just give us a finer line for all of them. So if we render that now, you can see that the lines are a bit thinner. So we might change that to 0.1 of a meter and see the change. There you have it.